Yesterday, Brazil lost. Again. It's a sentence that's getting increasingly more common the more time passes. This time it was against Argentina. Before the game even started, they was having UFC 296 in the bleachers. Messi was looking at that shit like, what the fuck? He didn't even know what to do. Bro came to play football and they beating each other with poles in the stands. I hope this dude okay. He was leaking like shit. The game itself was alright and all. Argentina's only goal was a header by Otamendi. But with their victory over Brazil, Brazil drops to 6th place in the South American World Cup qualifiers. This is part 1 of a 2-part video about Brazil. In this one, we're going to talk about the present day, or in other words, the downfall. Because let's be real, that's what it is. Brazil fell off. They're no longer the dominant force they once were. Their roster is weaker than it's ever been. Their superstar player is injured again, and he's out for probably about a year. They don't get their real new manager until next year. They've lost their last 3 games. They've only won 3 of their last 10 games. They currently sit in 6th place in South America. If this was any World Cup before 2026, Brazil wouldn't qualify. FIFA just added 2 direct slots for South America because of the expanded World Cup. That's the only reason they would even make it. So what happened to Brazil? 2 decades ago, this would be unthinkable. From 1994 to 2002, they won 2 World Cups and made the final in the other one. They did struggle in qualification back in 2002, but that was in the format where 4 teams made it. If that was today's standings, they'd very easily make it in. Being as low as 6th is wild for Brazil. That 2002 team was one of the most absurdly stacked teams the sport has ever seen. They played pretty football. I obviously wasn't alive for it, but when you go back and watch it, it's mesmerizing. Does it sound like I'm dick riding a little bit? Yeah, I won't lie, but I'm dick riding for a reason, bro. It was tough. If you go down the path of Brazilian football, after that, though, it's a steady decline until you end up in the modern day, where, respectfully, they're mid as fuck. But why? How? What happened? Well, there's a few possible reasons. Some are common sense, some are just theories. I don't agree with all of them, but most of them at least have a solid explanation. Some people think Brazil just haven't been able to keep up with European tactics, which have advanced a lot in the last couple of decades. There's always been this stereotype that South American teams play with more style and flair than European teams and aren't as technically advanced because of that. In the last 5 World Cups, Brazil has lost to a European team every time. 2006, they lost to France. 2010, they lost to the Netherlands. We know what happened in 2014. 2018, they lost to Belgium, and last year they lost to Croatia. That argument sort of doesn't hold up, but it also kind of does at the same time. On one hand, you could point to Argentina and say that they haven't faced the same problem. They've made 2 World Cup finals in the last decade and won one of them. The potential response to that is Messi. You could say that a lot of the time in Argentina's games against European teams, Argentina's getting boxed for most of the game, and it's Messi that drags them through. That's not a bad point. This has been the case at times. However, you could also say that it's not a South American problem and more of a Brazil problem. Basically, the rest of the world just wasn't advanced enough tactics-wise to stop Brazil's overwhelming superstar brilliance. As time passed, the rest of the world found ways to counter them, and Brazil didn't bother moving forward themselves. I don't know if I fully agree with that idea, but it may be somewhat true. You could say that Brazil sort of had a playstyle that relied on individual brilliance, and the more football became a system-run game, the less dominant they became. It could be at least a small factor, especially with the fact that Brazil has almost exclusively used Brazilian managers. Ancelotti next summer will be the first foreign manager in over half a century. There's also the fact that South American teams and European teams don't play each other too often. A lot of the time, they occasionally meet in friendlies every now and then boom, the next time they see each other, it's the World Cup. Teams like Brazil and Argentina don't really have enough opportunities to test themselves against top European teams before the biggest tournament in the world. It's gotten even worse with the creation of the Nations League. Now there's been even less opportunities for South American versus European games, though South American teams are joining the Nations League starting 2024. With all that being said, I think the main issues lie elsewhere, though. They're just nowhere near as talented anymore. It may sound kind of simple, but sometimes it just is that simple. In this case, I don't even need to make an argument. Just look at their squads over the last 20 years. The 90s squads and that legendary 2002 squad had players like Romario, Roberto Carlos, Rivaldo, Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Cafu, and numerous other incredible players. Then you look at today's team and you're just like, what the fuck happened? The decline definitely started around 2010 because the 2006 team was still nasty. A prime Kaká and prime Adriano to replace Rivaldo. Ronaldo may have been out of his prime, but he wasn't ass yet. Their World Cup exit was unfortunate, but that's still a great squad. By 2010, you start looking at the lineup like, okay, y'all not really cooking shit right now. Kaká was only 28, but he was quickly already approaching his washed years. He was no longer the player he was at Milan at all. Gilberto Silva, 33. Lucio, 32. Juan, 31. That legendary attacking trio of Ronaldo, Rivaldo, and Ronaldinho? Yeah, no. Take Luis Fabiano instead. Your other forward can be Robinho, who just scored a grand total of 0 goals all season for Manchester City that season. I'm not calling this team terrible or anything, but it's not a team that's really striking fear into anybody's heart, like not even in the slightest. I mean, they won the Copa America in 2007, but they'd still lost a lot of their biggest talents for various reasons, and the remaining ones were beginning to age. So they lost the Netherlands in the quarterfinals of the World Cup in 2010, their second straight quarterfinals loss. Before 2006, they'd made it to the final in every World Cup since 1990. No need to panic though, rebuilds don't happen overnight. It wasn't looking all bad for Brazil. They had a few guys to keep an eye on. Thiago Silva made his national team debut in 2008 at 23 or 24, but he only played in a few friendlies. He was keeping that bench boiling hot other than that. He really started playing for real in late 2010 after the World Cup, and he started every game of the 2011 Copa America. Marcelo's first call-up was back in 2006 at 16 years old, but he didn't consistently play for them until 2011 either. Ramirez was already playing meaningful games for Brazil in 2009 at the age of 21. David Luiz made his first Brazil appearance at 23 shortly after the 2010 World Cup, and he was consistently starting off the bat, even though the first meaningful games he played in for Brazil was the 2013 Confederations Cup. Alexandre Pato's first Brazil appearance was back in 2008 when he was 18. He never really played super consistently until the 2011 Copa America, where he had a brace in the group stage. It looked like they were slowly building a solid young core and kickstarting the next generation. It started looking even better in 2010 when a young superstar named Neymar was called up for the first time after the disappointing World Cup exit. They wasted no time with him. Usually players start off their international careers on the bench, but they threw his ass straight into the frying pan. He was started from the jump, and he only played 5 games before he was leading Brazil in the Copa America as a 19-year-old. Unfortunately, though, it was clear that these young Brazilians were not the stars of old. Pato wasn't even playing in Europe anymore by the end of 2013. Injuries had robbed him of his potential. Ramirez was never a superstar player. He was more of a good player that was important to those Chelsea teams early last decade. But if you asked people outside the Chelsea or Brazil fan base about him, I don't think they would have much to say, I'm not gonna lie. David Luiz was a good player at times, but he had a lot of defensive flaws and was nowhere near the defensive giants Brazil had at the back in their peak years. He's literally the face of you-know-what. Come on now. Neymar was a superstar and he was brilliant for Brazil, but I think some people underestimate just how reliant on him Brazil became, specifically their attack. Look at their starting 11 for the 2014 World Cup. Their defense is rock solid on paper. They got Marcelo and Alves at the fullback positions and Silva and Luiz at center back. Luiz is sort of the weak link of this group defensively, but it's still a great group of defenders. In the midfield, you have Paulinho and Luis Gustavo. Okay, I guess. In the attacking four, you have Oscar, Neymar, Hulk, and Fred. It's absurd how bad that looks without Neymar. He's been like a band-aid for Brazil the last decade or so, covering up just how poor their squads have been relatively. Hulk was playing in Russia, Fred was playing in Brazil, something that wasn't exactly a good thing for someone that should be a top player anymore. Julio Cesar played for a QPR team that was in the second division and went on loan to the MLS because he couldn't start for them. 3 of the players in the starting 11 were a season or 2 away from playing in China. Paulinho, Hulk, and Oscar each moved over there within the next few years. This is an insane drop-off, bruh. These motherfuckers were loaded just 8 years before this. Their strikers went from Adriano and Ronaldo to Fred. Their squad was better in 2018, I'll give it to them. They had Jesus at striker and Willian before he fell off at right wing. Prime Casemiro in the midfield with Coutinho before he was ass. Dani Alves missed this World Cup due to injury, though, and that definitely weakened what would have been a very, very solid defense. The most recent Brazil lineups just aren't impressive. Their best defensive players are Asian. He's definitely still good, but Silva is pushing 40. Casemiro getting up there too, and his level of play recently for United is definitely showing it. Richarlison was pretty good at the World Cup, but having to rely on him for goals just isn't ideal. Y'all already know what I have to say about Antony. Any team that employs this man is very clearly unserious. Jesus is unreliable health-wise, and now they have Martinelli playing at center forward instead of left wing. He hasn't been bad, by the way. Matter of fact, he's been one of the few bright spots for Brazil recently. They called up Endrick for the first time, hoping he can solve that issue, and maybe he will. Who knows? The striker situation in Brazil has been ass since 2006, though. Vinny was expected to be one of the new generation stars, but for Brazil, he hasn't been as good as he's been for Madrid. They were already struggling before Neymar's brutal injury, but now it's even worse. Brazil's been average without Neymar for over a decade, and that hasn't changed. The drop-off in talent over the last 20 years is obviously the most major issue, but I also feel like there's been a decline in respect. Nobody fears Brazil at all anymore, and they have no reason to. The biggest turning point was definitely 2014. You knew I was going to talk about it. Getting bent over and fucked on the biggest stage, and to make it all worse, they was at the crib. at their own house just getting pulverized. That was the most ruthless ass whooping I've ever seen. It was murder in front of the entire world. I wasn't even a football fan yet. I was still a kid when that happened, but even I watched that game live because my mama was a massive football fan. We did not miss any World Cup games. I'm hearing all this Brazil talk before the game just for Germany to march in and humiliate them. Their reputation took a massive hit. Nobody feared them at all anymore. They just got done in on their home turf. Their aura was just gone. Brazil's a lot like Manchester United. For a long time, they were a dominant force, feared by everyone. They have a ridiculous history of success in championships, but in recent years, they've somewhat fallen off. And though they're occasionally contenders, they're not really feared anymore. Maybe their young stars like Endrick or Vitor Roque can one day carry them back to the promised land. For now, it's looking grim for the former football giants.